Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and once again, welcome aboard the decks of the mighty RMS Titanic. We've looked at first class, we've looked at a little bit of second class, we've looked at the crew areas, but we haven't really looked at a lot is third class. This is Titanic Honor and Glory. It's a recreation of about 50% of the ship. This is their demo 401, and it's free, so you can go and download and explore for yourself. But I thought today would be really fun to take a look around the third class spaces, because interestingly, second class is often the forgotten class. You've got the extremes of first class with the luxury and the glamour and everything, and the exact polar opposite of that in third. Second is like kind of somewhere in the middle, so people don't talk about it so much. So probably a lot of what you're about to see won't shock you, but I'm sure there are a few things that actually will. So to begin with, we're having a look at the gangway door that we would have just walked through boarding at either Southampton or Cherbourg or Queenstown in Ireland, where the ship stopped briefly to drop off mail and take passengers on. These big shell doors that had to be watertight. You can see the big, I think they're called dogs, but the massive locks that would secure them to the side of the ship and create the seal. The gate to make sure that people couldn't open that up mid-voyage. Walking through here past storage for food and victuals and things, the potato room, the famous, one of the potato rooms, in fact. We are down on E deck. Now, this is part of the corridor, the massive corridor that joins the forward and aftermost sections of the ship. Now, there were big gangway doors just like this on E deck further forward as well, because third class was the largest class aboard ship. It had the most amount of people in it. So they needed a lot of berthing down here in the lower decks and a lot of ways to actually board the ship, expedite the boarding process. So there were a number of doors, but the reason you had forward doors and aft doors as well is because of the way that people were actually berthed on the ship where they were allowed to sleep. We'll go into that in a minute. Now, straight away, you'll notice this fairly thin wall bulkhead. The thing is, a lot of the partitioning down here, the bulkheads and the walls here that you see separating individual staterooms and things like that, it was made out of timber. It's very thin, and very, very little of this survives on the ship. In fact, there's really just like anything that was touching metal. So some of those door handles and things like that, they're down on the ship. But the rest of it didn't hold up so well. A lot of it was basically flattened during the sinking. But it also meant that this would have been a fairly noisy and communal space, I would imagine. We'll see a little bit more of that in a minute. We're walking back now. So this is facing towards the stern of the ship at the back. And that's facing towards the bow or the front. And I just want to show you a couple things. We've talked about this in our crew video, but we're now way past the fourth funnel towards the back of the ship, looking at one of the cargo hatches and the massive shaft leading all the way down to more third class berthing down there with some of the fancy red and white tiles. Looks very good. But if we keep heading aft, we're going to get into some of the actual accommodations where people would stay. We did briefly look at a cabin last time we were doing this, but I do want to show you in more detail one of these cabins. This is one of the major stairways that connects a lot of the third class sections at the stern of the ship. Here's your standard third class double bunk berth. And you can see what I mean about the communal living thing, right? So first of all, there are two bunks in here. The reason we were mentioning that there were doors, big, shell doors at the forward end of the ship and some at the stern towards the back of the ship is that typically passengers were segregated based on gender. So you would have women and children and families berthed towards the stern, and you would have single men berthed towards the front. And if there wasn't enough space for big families to have cabins together, sometimes your dad would have to be all the way at the front of the ship while you and your mum slept at the back. I did know a gentleman who was on a passenger liner that was bringing him out to Australia, and even then in the 60s, it was still done that way. And the only time he ever, on that 3-week voyage, the only time he got to spend time with his dad and sort of cuddle up was, he was like 5 years old, was up on the deck chairs on deck because they had to be berthed separately. You've got a wash basin here, so a big ceramic wash basin. It's not running water. It looks like it, but it's not. It's got a big tank in the top there that you could refill. And you could fill up your your glass. Really, really simple stuff. And at the top, you'll see that it is open as well. So that basically opens right out into the corridor outside. So every cough and sneeze and snore or anything else you do in your sleep, everybody would have heard it. You know, third class is kind of often portrayed as this like rabble of unwashed masses, and there's like a little bit of that almost in the James Cameron movie where they're portrayed as these kind of like, gee, how do you describe it? You know, the big party, they're all like heavy drinking and, you know, partying and playing it up. You know, third class people back then were almost as broad in their background and stories, much more in many cases, than first and second class. You did have quite a lot of those absolutely, you know, dirt poor immigrants coming out from places that were heavily, heavily affected by poverty in Europe, and Ireland and Britain, who really had not a penny to their name and hadn't really ever used things like electric light bulbs before, or even flushing toilets, right? But you also had a huge section of probably what we'd call now the working poor. So professionals like cobblers and things like that who didn't own their own shops, but had a trade, had a profession, and could do it quite well, but just wanted to make new lives for themselves. So I'll give you an example. My family actually were in Dublin at the time Titanic sank. My great-grandfather was a slater, so he made roofs. And my grandfather was born in 1917. He was also a slater before he ran off to join the British Army in the Second World War. These are the kind of people that would, you know, if they had wanted to up and leave Ireland to start a new life, they would have gone third class on a ship. And they were very respectable people. You know, they were clean and they, you know, starched their collars still and, you know, had their clothes laundered. They weren't this kind of like, you know, it's almost like this anti-migrant propaganda that was originated back then from people who were scared of so many people flooding into the country, you know, the unwashed masses of Europe. But these were good, hardworking people, and a lot of them made America what it is today. And Australia, you know, we took in a lot of people. So it's Spartan, and you might look at this and think, yikes. But the truth is, this is clean, clinical almost, hey? It looks sort of like a doctor's office. And there's a reason for that. Part of it is illness was a huge concern on ships like Titanic. You know, if you had fever or measles or something like that breaking out, this is pre-wide-scale vaccination adoption. You know what I mean? In fact, many vaccinations hadn't actually really been developed. You would have had sickness absolutely ripping through a ship like this. You know, a few hundred people, fairly crowded in. You saw how small those cabins were. You can imagine people could have got quite sick very quickly. So there was an infectious ward on board Titanic towards the stern. So there was an infectious hospital for that reason. There were very strict customs and health checks we will have had to have passed aboard the ship. And in fact, if we showed any symptoms at all of any of those illnesses, we would have had to have stayed behind. Kind of a little bit COVID reminiscent. But when the ship actually got to New York, she'd have to stop way before the Statue of Liberty and just after entering the Narrows at quarantine and sit there while she was inspected by customs and health officials to keep an eye out for any signs of illnesses or anything like that. Here we have water taps and water fountains. So unlike the other classes, you know, you're not having your water refilled regularly, so you can actually come up here and get some fresh water yourself if you so desire, which is good. But we're climbing up this main stairwell because we want to get up to C deck, which is where we are now. And now you can see things begin to open up and look a little bit brighter. You know, the thing is, right? This looks like second class in ships of Titanic's era, really. I mean, this looks comfortable and clean and very, very welcoming, I think. And what I really like is they make very clever use of space, you know, like under here, this nice little covered promenade area with benches. So if it's raining, you can still sit out here and read a book. And honestly, the view is pretty nice. A lot of thought went into these ships, the layout, how comfortable it would be. once we get to the top of these stairs, we do have a selection of 2 fairly nicely decorated rooms, separated by bulkhead. We'll go into this one first, the 3rd class smoking room. And I don't know about you guys, but I have been to a pub that looked exactly like this. Beautiful, you know, beautifully paneled, beautifully decorated. It's simple, but it's very comfortable. It's very elegant. You know, this would have been the domain of many of the 3rd class men who would have come up here for a cigarette or a drink. There should be a pantry around here somewhere that would have been serving drinks. And then you can see on the floor spittoons, because of course chewing tobacco was a big thing back then. And I think there had been experiences on ships in the past where ejected chewing tobacco would end up places you wouldn't want it. So having convenient spittoons nearby probably wasn't such a bad idea. You know, our team at the moment is modeling the Empress of Ireland, which was, you know, about 5 or 6 years older than Titanic. And that ship's smoking room for 2nd class looks very, very similar to this. So, you know, Titanic was just upping the ante on a lot of those older ships. But this is a really comfortable place. I mean, I can just imagine plonking myself down here with a book, a glass of whiskey, having a good read. So what we'll do, we'll head back out, and I'll show you the other main room for 3rd class. If we come out here, we take a right. We're now over on the starboard side, so the right-hand side of the ship. So now we're facing backward, and now we are facing forward. If we come in here, this is the 3rd class general room. More like a lounge, if you will. It's very, very similar in layout, actually, to the other room. The only major difference, really, is the choice of decoration. I mean, this is quite, again, very simple. You know, wooden benches, wooden chairs, that kind of thing. None of the plush furniture you'd see in other spaces. But still, plenty comfortable. This was popular with the women and children families, you know. It wouldn't have been clouded in smoke, for one thing. But you can see the portholes there are bringing in a lot of natural light. It's quite a comfortable space again. Bearing in mind, a lot of these folks, many of them hadn't stayed in hotels probably that looked anything near as nice as this on land. So this would have been extremely comfortable. And I'm sure this room would have been absolutely jam-packed during the daytime. I can only just imagine it would have been absolutely going off. This door here is for the use of crew only. Unfortunately, we can't open it, but it goes back into the steering gear room. So that's where the ship's big steering engines were that actually operated the rudder. But we can't get back there. That's the last room compartment in the Titanic, at the very turn of the stern where it curves around like that. There is very, very little of this left. I think there's a few tiles, but that's about it. Everything in here was just kind of wiped out, but it is a very pretty, comfortable, clean space. So if you've, you know, sat down and had a drink, or you've come in and read a book and you want to get out and stretch your legs a bit, it's simply a matter of walking out here and getting out onto the aft 3rd class open promenade. So 3rd class actually gets quite a bit of open deck space, which is cool, but it is cluttered with a lot of equipment. So you can see we're at the well deck behind the 4th funnel there. We can stand here and ogle the 1st class passengers as they come up here on A deck and look out over the ocean. In fact, it was a major plot device in a fairly famous Titanic-related movie. And then coming up here, we have, don't laugh, the poop deck. So again, festooned with benches, just so folks can come out and sit down, relax, stretch their legs, sit under the sun. But we are in the shadow of the big electric cranes that we used for loading cargo. We walked past those cargo hatches earlier when we boarded. The first one we saw was that one there. So as you guys know, that one goes all the way down into the bottom of the ship. And if we come around here, we'll walk underneath the docking bridge. The docking bridge was an auxiliary steering position on the ship. So I mentioned earlier that the steering engine room was behind the general room and the smoking room. So these are the skylights that go down into the steering engine room. And you can see that the wheel there, the ship's helm, actually has a control link going directly down. That's because it it could, unlike the other wheels, that wheel right there was actually directly connected to the steering engine, which was important because if your if your lines on the forward wheels were severed, there were 2 wheels up on the bridge. If the hydraulic lines linking those telemotors to the steering engines here were severed for whatever reason, you could rely on this as a backup. But this bridge was used during docking, and the wheel here could, in theory, be used by a pilot to assist in departing, especially at New York, where the stern is in a fairly kind of difficult position, kind of half jutting out into New York Harbor, and the bow is way forward, 800 odd feet away, and it probably would be best to operate the ship from well astern, so you could actually see where you were going out into the Hudson when you backed off. But you also get a fairly good view down the length of the ship, not a great unobstructed view, because as you can see, we can't see all the way forward, but enough that you'll be able to make sure you're clearing any docks and things like that. But as a third class passenger, you don't have to worry about that. You'd probably just be sitting around watching the proceedings. And then coming down here, we get to the very stern of the ship. And I'm sure many people would have come up here and sat leaning up against the rail, watching the horizon disappearing before them. The railing really doesn't look very high, does it? I think it was 3 foot something. I would probably topple right over the side. So this is our open promenade at the stern. It would have been extremely popular. Children playing, people relaxing. Just a nice space. It wasn't a very long voyage. So, I think for many of those people that I mentioned who worked hard to make a living would have probably really enjoyed the break. A 5, 6, 7 day break. The madness of travel and leaving home and then a few days actually spent on the ship would have been really fun and enjoyable for those who weren't seasick. And unfortunately, big as Titanic was, she still moved a lot in the waves. She would have been doing these very long, slow rolls and pitches as she went along. All ships do. It doesn't matter how big they make them. They will all pitch and roll. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go down and take a meal. And to do that, we have to go down to D-Deck, where we are now, and we have to go down one more, back to E-Deck. The general layout of the ship was quite clever. As I mentioned before, the major staircases were arranged in such a way that most of the third class accommodation was centered in one part of the ship at the stern or in one part of the ship at the bow. Second class is probably the most localized of the classes because everything is basically centered on the fourth funnel and just slightly behind it. First class, of course, got like full run of the upper decks. You can see in here various pantries and things like that for serving food and stuff. We'll run past the cargo hatches. We'll go back all the way forward to one of the fairly famous spaces on the ship, Scotland Road. Now, Scotland Road, we've mentioned before, was a big service corridor that essentially ran on one side of the ship, unobstructed all the way down the length. Super convenient for the use of crew to obviously get around, but even more convenient probably for passengers who needed to, get up forward or visit their family. If you're a man sleeping at the front of the ship and you needed to go see your family at the back, this is how you'd do it. It's just a long way. But to get there, you would walk straight past the engine room. So well worth the visit. But, all of this berthing, all these cabins and things now, we're really in crew territory. This is all for stewards, engineers, that kind of thing. You can actually see them marked out up here. Storekeepers. Who else have we got? Those stairs go up to F deck. Down to F deck. That's interesting. What have we got here? That's an emergency door. Storekeepers over here. Musicians. Engineers, stewards. So all these different people needed places to stay. This is the very famous view of Scotland Road as it goes all the way down to the forward end of the ship. But third class passengers would have got to know it very well because coming down here, we're going to get some food. And to do it, we come in here. And we go down this nondescript looking stairwell and we are in the dining saloon. So, They had very different sitting times for third class, because obviously there were quite a lot of them. And as big as this room is, it's actually split into two. As big as it is, it certainly couldn't fit all of them, so they had to do them in big lots. But let's take a moment to appreciate, again, how comfortable this is. You know, it's not ornate. You can see the side of the ship. You can see all the steel and the beams and everything, the rivets. But it's comfortable, and to have somebody cooking for you on the course of your voyage, that is luxury, you know, especially back in 1912. That would have been absolutely fantastic. So they do have a menu here, actually. Can we have a look? What have we got? Excellent. It is actually breakfast time here. April 14th, 1912. Let's see what we're going to have. We're going to have oatmeal porridge and milk. That sounds good. Smoked herrings, if that's your thing. Jacket potatoes, yummy. Hammered eggs. Sounds pretty good right now. Fresh bread and butter. Marmalade, Swedish bread, tea, coffee. Very nice. Dinner is what the British called lunch. Would have been a rice soup. Yum. Fresh bread, cabin biscuits. Yeah, roast beef with brown gravy. Very nice. Sweet corn, boiled potatoes, plum pudding, and sweet sauce and fruit. Having dessert, you know, alone would have been so exciting and luxurious. And then for tea, dinner time, we've got cold meat, cheese, pickles, fresh bread and butter, stewed figs and rice, cabin biscuits, gruel. Delicious. Gruel. There's a funny little note down there on the bottom. Any complaint respecting the food supplied, want of attention, or incivility should be at once reported to the purser or chief steward. For purposes of identification, each steward wears a numbered badge on the arm. Any complaint regarding the food, want of attention, or incivility. Isn't that great? Incivility. Sir, I should like to make a complaint. My steward was incivil toward me. The food is basic. It's very, very simple, but it's calorie rich, hearty, good, filling stuff, and I'm sure that would have certainly made a lot of people very happy, especially people who'd struggled so long to actually put food on the table. You'll notice that there are all these various different shipping lines advertised on the walls, and you might think that's unusual for the White Star Line to be advertising Holland America Line, for example. They're quote unquote competitors. What have we got over there? We've got Atlantic Transport Line. There's the Olympic White Star Line. These are all international mercantile marine ships and their companies. So the IMM had essentially acquired a whole bunch of shipping lines to create a monopoly on the North Atlantic. And ultimately it didn't work, interestingly. Cunard was never acquired. Cunard was the great competitor to White Star. They were not acquired by IMM. IMM was headed up by the American financier, J.P. Morgan. It's led to the kind of mistaken belief that Titanic was an American ship, or J.P. Morgan bought the Titanic. It's just not exactly true. But it was, Titanic was a British flag vessel with a British crew operating under British regulation. So it doesn't mean, though, that the other IMM ships can't be advertised on the walls down here. It's great. Look, this is, in my mind, extremely comfortable, and it looks very nice, and I would very happily have my meals down here. You know, you're only on the ship for 6 days, so, you know, if it looks Spartan, this is probably the funniest table. Table 17. Just sat facing the wall. I love it. That's fantastic. That's really funny. You would have sat there. That's great. The anti-socials of the group. It reminds me, you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of, Japanese restaurants, like sushi restaurants and that, where they'll just have like a row of benches facing the actual sushi train and no one talks to each other and they just sat looking straight ahead. I can imagine that. People with their headphones in. That's great. And there isn't one on the other side because there's a bench. There's a serving bench. That's really funny. Is there one in here? No, there is not. I've never noticed that before. The most antisocial table on the Titanic. So yeah, you will notice that the room is separated in two because right here we have a watertight bulkhead and the door to actually shut it. This isn't an automatically closing door. It is one that has to be hand cranked shut. So you can see the spindle there, the shaft, goes all the way up to the deck above. There would have been a socket, and you would go to the deck above, up that staircase. crank it shut to make sure this was all watertight. This area, long gone. You know, this is like in the vicinity of the breakup zone, so this was all destroyed. So there's none of this left. So Titanic Honor and Glory have done a fantastic job bringing this back to life, because it is a really unseen space in the Titanic. It's quite cool. Now we'll head further forward now. We'll keep walking along and we'll head up to one of the more famous rooms in third class. So we've been walking for about 15 years and we've got to the forward end of the ship. You guys know what this is already. This is indeed a cargo hatch. So we're now at the forward well deck, basically level with the forward well deck. If we were to go down here, we'd get to more third class berthing and accommodations down on F deck. So if you come down here, you can tell straight away that it's third class because of this red flooring. I forget exactly what this was called, but it was a mixture that was applied. It was fairly, you can imagine it, fairly grippy. You know what I mean? It was easy to clean. It wasn't linoleum. I don't think it was linoleum. I think it was a patent mixture, but I've forgotten its name. If someone in the comments knows what this was called, please let me know. I swear they applied it to like British warships and things, but I have forgotten its name. Anyway, so we're down here now on F deck. I just wanted to show you this because if you were a man and you were berthed down here, you would have had access to a secret space. If you come up here, we're going to climb one more set of stairs. So there's Scotland Row. That's what we just came down, but we're going to go up to D deck because here we get the open space. Now, this looks very nice and lovely, but at sea, it wouldn't have looked like this. That cargo hatch would be covered with a big lid, basically. So all of this would have been shut up and the only light coming in would have been from these portholes. So it looks deceptively nice. This actually reminds me of this one time I went to Kilmainham jail in Ireland, and if you've ever seen the jail, it's all big and open and there's like heaps of windows and it lets tons of light in, which is really nice on a sunny day. And it was a sunny day when I went, and it was lovely. You know, everything was super light. It was the middle of summer. It was like 25 degrees Celsius, and the people running the jail said, it's not usually like this. You know, it's mostly raining and grey and cold, which would make this unlivable. They had to explain to us that this actually wasn't a nice place to be. It's a little bit like this. You know, it's a space. It's obviously there's no decoration whatsoever, unlike the general. I mean, I guess there's this. We've got a little map of the tracks of the White Star steamers. That's nice. But yeah, there's very little has gone into this. This is much more like third class on ships of like, you know, the Empress of Ireland and her sisters era. But, you know, it's a nice, open, clean space for you to come and chill out, basically. It's just more space. I would imagine the general room and the smoking room would have been absolutely going off. So having more space is certainly not a bad thing. It's also very handy for the crew to be able to have this much open space during cargo, loading and unloading and that kind of thing. We even have the base of the mast right here. Look, that goes all the way up. It goes up well into the sky. This room is, of course, fairly famous for having been the site of a bit of a party on the last night of Titanic's voyage. It wasn't meant to be the last night, on the 14th. So there was music, there was a band, we all know it. It was shown in the film, but the people were dancing, in the film at least. I don't know if they did it in real life, but on top of these hatch covers, which always makes me nervous. Because there's like a 5-story drop. And there's a guy who doesn't like heights very much. I don't like that. So the open space is nice, but it's very basic. It's big, it's comfortable. Just coming down here, there is an open cabin, but this isn't third class. This is actually a space for 2 of the ship's masters at arms. It looks a little bit too comfortable to be third class, doesn't it? Too nicely appointed. Yeah, so this is for the ship's security, essentially. They could sleep in here. They started to bunk up, though. So even though they had a very important job, they were given fairly rudimentary berthing. But coming in here, you get a sense of the fairly basic accommodations you would have to expect as a single man or a group of men traveling on Titanic. You have bunks, and you have a folding seat. Just one. And that's it. You know, it's simple, but it's clean. And you have your own bunk. You know, it's ships had massive dormitories where hundreds of people were crammed into a very, very small space. This is a huge step up from that. It's obviously nowhere near as comfortable as first or second class. In fact, I don't think it's even as comfortable as the little cabins back that we were looking at the stern. But, you know, for a lot of these working men, it was home and comfy, and it was just enough to get them through. Again, it was only 6 days at sea, and you only come in here to sleep, right? So in theory, you'd be out spending a lot more time in the open rooms, you know, the open space, the general room, that kind of thing. There's one of those doors that I mentioned earlier that we boarded. There is one last space that we can get to as third class. We have to go all the way up here and then go up top. Let's see if we can get there. We would have to go through this door to get there. Unfortunately, the door is shut, but I'm going to find a way to cheat to get myself through that door. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it turns out I can't actually get there. I can just look at it. But that's one of the big doors that we could come through to come out onto the third class forward open promenade. Just like the stern, it's one of the well decks. It's covered in equipment. And we could actually even get up top here. However, we were not allowed forward of that breakwater, that big white wall that you can see there. It's quite low, you can probably easily step over it, but you weren't meant to go forward of that. There are, however, photographs of people who are clearly passengers forward of that breakwater. So how rigorously enforced that was at sea is questionable. During docking, absolutely. I mean, all of this stuff would have been moving and blasting steam, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere near it. And the crew would just basically push you out of the way, right? Loading and unloading of cargo. Likely this area would have been shut off to passengers, I'm sure. You can see the big cargo crane here with its gauges and things. But at sea, this is not used really for very much at all as far as operating the ship. So it could very happily become, promenade space so passengers come up and get some sun. So there you have it. There's a lot more to talk about in third class. It'd be great to get the Titanic Honor and Glory guys back on specifically to point out some of the stuff they enjoyed learning about while they were making it. But I like it. There's just something about those 1900s, 1910 spaces where it's all like white walled timber paneling and, you know, like natural light flooding in, like the general room back there. Just really, I love that space so much. It's so comfortable. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, for my ancestors, this would have been the dream. This would have been a fantastic way to get across the Atlantic on ships like Titanic. Olympic, Lusitania, Mauritania also had very nice third class spaces. Of course, tragically, Titanic didn't make it to New York, where she was intended. I want to end on one more poignant thought. We have a video coming up about the British inquiry into the loss of the Titanic. Now, I want to point something out to you guys. The lifeboats on the ship are there, right? They're a deck above us on the boat deck, up there. Third class, as you know, is through that door and 3 decks down. When the inquiry was looking into the layout of the ship, they came to the conclusion where they said that the design and construction of Titanic didn't make it so that any other class had any better chance of getting to the lifeboats. I want you to think about those passengers in third class who were down in Scotland Road, down in those winding corridors, who nobody came for to tell them how to get out, who had never been where we are standing right now in first class. There's actually no easy marked way to get from that promenade that we were just standing on here. You have to know, first of all, that there's a little gate there, which, by the way, the crew locked to keep the third class from rushing the boats, supposedly. Again, it's only waist high, but still, not great. And then you would have to know that there is a little sliding door here, and there's one on the deck below that leads up the stairs to get to the boat deck. But even that was marked for use of crew only. So there are all these physical and implied barriers to third class to stop them really from getting up top. And the fact that the inquiry found that, oh, if you were in third class, you had just as much a chance of getting into the lifeboats is complete malarkey and basically inexcusable. They didn't even question a third class person. They did not invite a third class passenger to give testimony at the inquiry. The more I read about it, the angrier I get. So, it's an interesting note to end on. This was meant to be an era where shipping lines were giving migrants and third class steerage better standards. But it seems that it was done more in the interests of marketing and PR. Because when it really came down to it, during the disaster and afterward, there was very little thought given to them at all. So it's a sad story, ultimately, but it's good to be able to explore it. It's good to be able to get a feel for what it must have been like to be on board, if only for the fact that we can remember these people and actually get some sense of what it would have been like for those happy days before the Titanic sank, when they were on the most beautiful ship in the world, heading for a new life. Didn't intend to end on a sad note. Sorry, it just came to me. Just came over me. Well, like I said, it would be great to get the Titanic Honor and Glory guys back on soon. Thank you so much for watching. We've done some of the crew areas. Maybe we can do a few more. If you guys have any things you'd really like to see, let me know. There's plenty more to see on Titanic. Many, many more spaces. Maybe we can do a tour next time and look at some of the places where like specific interesting events happened during the sinking, maybe beforehand, that kind of thing. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see any more of these. Well, as always, thank you so much for watching. It's been wonderful to get to spend the last half hour or so with you. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.